Well, I've been doing those little TikTok videos.
Yeah, I watched them.
On kind of behind the scenes for design stuff that I've worked on. Because, I mean,
it's
behind
awesome.
you, there's a lot of really cool awards, but there's also really great brands and products. And, as you kind of said about the podcast, it doesn't just happen. And I really love, seeing and learning how the sausage is made, proverbially speaking.
Of course.
So I kind of also try to tell people, like, be as selfish as possible when I'm working with them, you know, versus just kind of going into like auto mode. And for myself, I was like, what would I want to see? Like, I like TikTok in some sense for the storytelling nature of it.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to tell little stories about how some of these brands and worlds came to be.
Break down the walls.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's what this podcast is genuinely like, hey, a look inside of our studio. We're going to talk about stuff. We're going to talk to people. And it just feels like you're here behind the scenes with us. And I think, we've talked about making that kind of TikTok content because it's one thing to just show brands and be like, look how fucking dope this is. Case study. And it's another thing to be like, hey, this is where we started. But that content is hard to make too.
I think it's like you got to know your audience. And I don't really care if people watch the stuff that I'm working on that don't care about design or branding. Yeah. And I really am just trying to think for like, I don't know, it's like just go niche, Yeah. And for people that really think a lot about, I'm trying to build this brand or I'm commissioned to work on this, like just seeing how someone else thinks through it, I always find helps spark me to think better.
Yeah, no, TikTok is incredible about with how much design content is being created. And I think about this a lot because there's a lot of guys on there, the internet creative directors, and they're like, let me break this down, but they don't have the history that you have, and they don't have the history, and the experience.
I like Ashwin and Oren and stuff. Yeah. Like I definitely watched a lot of they're really good at it, and it comes so naturally, and it doesn't come naturally for me. And each video I do takes like weeks. But I wanted to try to just talk on not per se other people's work because I don't know it. Yeah. But I wanted to just be like, anytime I worked on something, I'm like, oh, this came out pretty good. I'm like, then I just try to take a step back and be like, man, that process was a bitch. and then just try to go and look at like screenshots or things of it. I'm like, oh, it was from this weird place. And so I just am being like, that's what I know how to talk on. And so that's it.
I love it. Yeah. Oren and Ashwin, those dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't come natural to me either. We've tried some things.
The front facing cam is tough.
It's fucking rough out
It's hard. And I was like, I just got kind of married recently and I had like a tick where like the phone was up and it'd be like that.
Oh man.
And just the echo, like, or like I was hitting end before my words were done.
I know.
I think the first one I made, it took me like 30 hours or something for like
that's why I haven't made any because I
was so boomered out like
that is like the separation of the generations on the internet is like the people like Gen Z can just rip a front facing video like nobody's business.
Well, it's like my wife is like millennial Gen Z cusp, and so she's so native to it. Like I was kind of inspired / de-inspired, being like, how the hell does she do that to being inspired of not inspired, but being angry of like, I gotta figure this out. But like, config was yesterday at the time of this recording, and it's so desktop quote unquote centric for creation, and it's quite progressive of what they're working on, etc. But a lot of younger folks are more and more creating on their phones. And I think that's something that for our strata of age, I think doesn't come naturally.
3, 2, 1. Kevin. Hair's looking good, dude. It's got a bit of a swoop to the side. You got a little curl going.
We already did this bit out.
Yeah, every
already
week
rolled out my
we're talk about the hair.
Yeah, you got to do it every week.
Let people know how Kevin's hair is looking on the pod.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliments.
We got a very special guest in the house. Emmett Shine is a designer and entrepreneur working at the intersection of art and commerce. Emmet is renowned for co-founding Gin Lane Pattern Brands and his newest venture, Little Planes. He's got the hat and the shirt. It's a branding and experience design studio for consumer-centric, tech-enabled startups based out of New York City. Over the last 10 years, he's co-founded 5 companies, launched 50 fucking brands, and has been a part of 7 successful exits. In 2006, almost 20 years ago, I met Emmett. We were just two young, cool graphic designers working on a little brand called Vitamin Water. Look at us now. Welcome to the show, Emmett Shine.
Hell yeah.
All right.
Good intro.
Yeah. How you doing, man?
Thank you, Alex. And Kevin's hair is definitely flowing nice.
Yeah.
For anyone listening in, it's like ASMR describing of the hair.
That's right. Yeah. He's a big Bengals fan. I know you're a big Jets fan. So you guys.
We'll get to that at the end.
Yeah. Aaron Rodgers still the guy?
I don't know, man. You know, it's like a PG gang culture. You're just locked in. You know, it's like, what am I to do?
I know. What are you gonna do? Not watch?
Yeah.
I confronted my father recently. I was like, Nick's, Matt's like, why did you do this to me? But it's part of the journey. It's fun.
It is. I think it builds character.
That's right.
The best sports fan bases are, it's like the Red Sox fan base, which I hate as a New York fan, but you always admired how much they continued to lose and how devoted they were. And then they started winning and you're like, whatever.
It's not fun to root for teams that win. No. That's what I like to say. But you grew up on Southampton, Long Island, a landscaper father and a painter mother. Kevin does the research and I just read it here. But should we put some respect on Long Island? This is also my main point of the podcast here. Someone who has taken a lot of heat for my Long Islanderness. Can you help me by saying Long Island isn't a lame place and a great place to grow up?
Yeah, I mean, you got Jim Brown, you got Rakim, you got Busta Rhymes, you got Billy Joel, you got Jerry Seinfeld,
Rick Rubin,
what
Lindsay
else
Lohan.
You got so many. Yeah, Lindsay Lohan,
Steve Buscemi.
It's just the list of good, funny, creative, weird people is on and on. I mean, my dad is super Long Island and like always talks about how for like the world wars and whatever that, like Grumman and all these aeronautical kind of smart people stuff moved out there. And it was this big center for that. And it attracted a lot of really smart people. And then the kind of offshoots from that. And then they all got kind of stuck in this island when there's a lot of really smart people, but there's a lot of really crazy people too.
Yeah.
And it's like, it has an island kind of fever thing to it, even though it's really big. It's a really big Long Island. And technically, I think there was a weird Supreme Court case where it's technically considered an archipelago, but it's for some political reasons, it's a freaking island, like the waterways around it are water, you know? And also people don't always know Brooklyn and Queens are technically on Long Island.
I like to remind people of that.
And then the only borough which is landlocked of New York City is the Bronx.
I mean, Kevin, I told you Emmett's very smart. He knows things about Long Island.
It's all facts.
Made that all up.
Yeah. Growing up in like a place where people go to vacation, it's not for rich people and like white linen pants, white parties and stuff like that. What was it like being a kid like in that sort of environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like a townie through and through.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like a tale of two cities, the best of times, the worst of times. There's parts of it that are pretty cool. I think you can be a townie out there and there's a more of a transient flow of culture and information and wealth, capital, whatever that kind of comes through. So if you're just in some small podunk town, you may not get access to that. And in the Hamptons, you don't always have access to that for many months of the year if you're just a normal person.
Sure.
But then there's a few months, for better or worse, where it can feel like the world converges on your town and, you're delivering ice, you're a pool boy, you're, a babysitter, you're, a lifeguard, you're a landscaper, whatever. You're
Were those jobs that you
market.
worked? Like what?
I wasn't a babysitter, but all those other ones. Yeah. I did like 50 blue collar jobs before I was like 19. Like you're just, you just are working. And the parts of it that are not great is I think there's like, I forget the phrase, it's called like the paradise paradox or the paradise problem. And there was like a case study on like why like Aspen and a few other places have this like insanely high suicide rate.
Okay, interesting.
And there's a part where you are attracted to these places or you're there and you feel like you're a part of something and then you're not.
Sure.
Or the pressure to be what you see as this outsized default or normal. And it only happens for like these seasonal kind of times. It's like seasonal depression times super shredder.
Whoa. Wow. Yeah.
And so I always compared it to like a circus comes into town. And when it comes into town, you're on stage. Yeah. And there's the spotlight. And even if you're in the back, you're like, Mom, I just was in like Barnum Bailey Brothers Ringling whatever circus, and they're squinting like, oh, I see you in the fourth row behind the bear on the unicycle, and you're like, yep, that's me. But then all of a sudden it's like, and show leaves town, And then you're still kind of on stage, but there's no spotlight. And, you know, a lot of times, like, if you made some money, like doing blue collar jobs, you blow it, you know, because you want to impress these out of towners, and, you know, and so, you know, I've seen a lot of friends and families succumb to stuff of that. And I've also seen people be successful and make a lot of money. So it's kind of extremes, but, you know, it's also diverse in Southampton. People wouldn't perceive it, but like there's a Native American reservation in the town. There was a lot of different groups of folks that were originally drawn out there for working in the fields and potatoes and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in a very Polish neighborhood. So we all have our stories wherever we're from. And I think if you're a creator or creative, you know, either you find the stories where you're from or you leave to go find stories where you see.
So one of the things I think is so cool about you is you and your friends growing up had a brand called Lola. Was that your first like foray into like building a brand or a company or anything that was sort of, you know, out there in the world?
Yeah. I mean, you know, we like grew up in like the 90s. And so it was like, you know, you're just watching like skateboarding films or like Goodfellas or like listening to like Wu-Tang or Nas or Biggie or whatever. And it was just so much like masculine lore building. And so I think like every little town, you know, had their crews, and you had your crew of friends, and, you know, everyone would like write their crew names on their shirts and Sharpies, and we all skateboarded. And so everyone would like try to, you know, find hello, my name is, you know, post office stickers and put them on the boards. And we all skated at this kind of dilapidated park in the village of Southampton where, you know, the conservative part of it didn't want kids in town, and there wasn't really an investment of like a playground or anything. So we would skate at this place that other kids from the Hampton, Sag Harbor, Montauk, Hampton Bays would all come to. And then in the summer, you know, if you were like a city kid that went out to the Hamptons and you were kind of bad or wanted to be bad or whatever, that's where you'd go.
Hell yeah.
And so we definitely like had a little group since like fourth grade. So I think I've kind of in hindsight been having practice of like world building or narrative building with a group of people. And
yeah,
I would say like, you know, like if someone was dissing Nas, you know, they'd be like, oh, he chipped his tooth because he was like staring out the window so much, you know, as if it was bad that he was like an observer and writer. It's like,
sure,
I was always kind of that of my friend group. They were, a lot of them were pretty crazy and gregarious, or, you know, got into action, and I would be there and observing. But I was also the one that I think would later around the time of meeting you, and where it's like, oh, now we have a skateboarding company, you know, that would be okay, Emmett, like I just did this thing, so now you make that into a shirt, or
let's
like
monetize, baby,
or like let's just like protect an identity.
And you were a photographer, right? So,
yeah, I went to NYU for photography.
So growing up with all these sort of friends, like, were you the artistic one of that crew? Was everyone an artist? Because I feel like you were like, at least there was tons of merch, right? Like that was kind of the main.
We all were like, again, just like you got to understand the era and the New York kind of mindset, and Long Island unto itself is unto itself, but it's still super influenced by New York City. And I think, you know, I would say like we grew up like a rated R version of kids, which was like NC-17, you know?
Sure.
And so everyone, you know, like you skated and you wrote graffiti, even if it was just in your notebook, you know, at worst, you know, like in school, if then, you know, maybe you do more. But everyone was pretty creative, and I didn't really take photographs that much till my later years of high school when I got a camera. I wasn't so like, oh, I'm photo guy, you know? And a lot of my friends I thought were way better at like drawing or painting or graffiti. And my mom is an artist. So I kind of always had this complex of like, everyone is just way better at art than me. But I think, got good at a lot of different art things while always being like second best at any one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very cool. Like, I think to people listening, they're like, you were in this like cool skateboarding, you know, community in the 90s, you know, sort of get into trouble wearing your own merchandise. And, you know, I do think it's funny because looking back on it, it makes perfect sense to me. My friends, we just smoked weed and got drunk, and like, we didn't really make any, we didn't have any, a brand or any sort of name.
We did that too.
Yeah. But, you know, I do think it's funny. I always talk about too, like growing up at that time, it's like, being a creative person isn't like what it is today, where you have all these tools or you have all these people that you look up to and sort of all these multi-hyphenate sort of creators. It was like, for me, I was the one kid that made, art stuff, and I like to draw and I like to paint and I do these things. And it wasn't like, oh, that's the cool kid that creates. It was like kind of like, oh, that's he makes things. Yeah. It wasn't necessarily like what it is today, where if you don't make things, that's actually weirder. When did you start like creatively hustling / making money from design websites?
When I came to the city, I graduated high school and I didn't go to college. Not to be conscientious of it or cool. I just was like, fuck that. Like it just wasn't for me. Like my parents were divorced. I was living at home with my mom, kind of helping out with cost. And I just, honestly, I thought it was like irresponsible. Like they didn't have money to give me. And I probably, if I was to make any, could, use or contribute it back to the house that I was in with myself, my mom and my sister. And I was landscaping. My dad was in Sag Harbor. I was landscaping for another landscaping company, not even his. I didn't have a car. I would pay a kid to pick me up and drive me. He would landscape with me and he would pick me up every morning for like $50 a week. It was kind of extortion, but I just didn't have a car.
Damn.
And I worked at a landscape nursery too. And then in the summer, I also worked at being a busboy at a few different spots, but I stayed at home for a year. And, I had like a therapist guy that I kind of saw like on one of those sliding scale things. And he was from the reservation. And I would go talk to him, and his name was Keith. And one day kind of, he was just like, dude, you're kind of or you're interesting. I had barely left Long Island. Yeah. And I'm on the east end of Long Island. And he was like, you should get out of here. And I was like, all right. Oh, if you say so, kind of, when you're young and you're kind of like lost or whatever, and someone that you like, I don't know, look up to. And I was probably seeking some semblance of, male mentorship or guidance. And he was like a cool guy from the res, but was also secretly really nerdy. And, we would like nerd out and talk about, books and theory and stuff. And so long story short, I had some money saved up living at home and landscaping, a few $1,000, and we looked at a map or like a globe, and like the furthest place away was like Fiji, which I didn't know how to get to. And there was New Zealand. And I was like, all right, I'll go to New Zealand. And I got a passport, and I was going to take a boat, like a freight boat. But it's actually kind of like a weird process to get on one of those boats. So I, ended up doing an airplane, and I went to New Zealand for like 100 days. And that's where I started really taking photographs. I went by myself, just photographed everything, got it all developed down there. I brought a little watercolor kit, would just be painting on them, and started to reconnect kind of with my dad. And I met him. He was down in Puerto Rico surfing. And he was like, you should go to college. Yeah. And you should apply to art school. Like all the stuff you did in New Zealand on your own is pretty cool. And so I did. And that's how I got into NYU. And when I went to NYU, I say all that as a preface because I didn't go into college like 13th grade. Sure. I went in after kind of barely graduating high school. Like I was smart, I got good grades, but I was really struggling to show up my senior year. I just kind of lost, I don't know. I didn't think I was going to go to college, so I didn't really care. And then when I did go to college, I felt like I had just traveled a lot of the world by myself. I was just in a very different space, and I was kind of paying for myself to go to college. It was, I had a lot of, luckily, financial aid and stuff, but my mindset was in a different place. So I get to college and like, I'm in art school, and I kind of realized, because I loved art and my mom is an artist, I knew a lot of art history that they were teaching. I was like, oh, I know this artist, or I know about chiaroscuro, or with these concepts and rules of thirds or whatever. I really wanted to just make art, and then, it was just really expensive. And so I was like, okay, I can make money again, like being a busboy in a nightclub in New York City, because I worked in nightclubs in the Hamptons. I can, do blue collar jobs, because I did blue collar jobs, but they don't pay a lot, and I need the kind of time. So there's, different ways that you can make money kind of faster. And I try to say, okay, I'm going to try to focus on, can I make money doing what I like, which is photography. And I got a computer. I never had a computer, till I went to college. Yeah. And there was digital photography, which was new at the time. And didn't cost as much money as developing your stuff. And from that, I learned about Adobe, and I learned about, Photoshop, and then Illustrator and InDesign, and then this program called Dreamweaver, and then about HTML and JavaScript. And so I could then kind of badly stitch together, like I could do your photographs, or I could do graphic design or branding, I could build you a website, I could use Flash. I was just hustling anything to make cash to be able to not drop out of college. And that was the best way I could figure out how to make money faster than getting paid like 20 an hour, 15 an hour, 10 an hour.
Yeah. And this is very early days internet brands.
This is like 2002, 2003, 2004.
When did you meet Chad Hogan?
Yeah, so Chad Hogan, who he's referring to, was, I don't know what his official title was, but essentially to me, he was like the creative director at Rockaware. And as you can hear by some of my references, growing up in the 90s, like anyone, whether you liked hip hop or not, you're just so influenced by it. And I did really like hip hop and rap. And I also liked kind of the entrepreneurialness of it. And I saw on Craigslist, I remember being in Southampton in North Sea and at a friend's house, like my shirt off on his family computer, being like, I got to get like a cooler job, like, or I don't know. And I saw on Craigslist, it was like internship, like at Rockaware. And I think I wrote, and I think it was like, I'm more better. But I think I was so unhinged. I was like, yo, I know more about Jay-Z than you do, like as like a white kid from the Hamptons, but I just was so like, in my mind, I'm like, I know every one of his songs, everything, like and so I think they literally were like inside joke. Like we gotta meet
this kid.
Yeah. Because I remember I came to the interview and it was like 8 people like this, like they're like, come in, that crazy kid's here. And I think they wrote back or something. I don't fully remember. It was Chad and this woman, Cody, and a few others, and like Aunt Lava, and they were like, do you have a portfolio? And I was like, no, but I just made a skateboard. And they were like, okay, bring in your skateboard. And so I showed up for my first design interview with a skateboard. And it was the graphic from Kids, but I had photoshopped in my friends with photos I had taken, and I think it said Lola in the same font. That was like our skateboard. And so my portfolio, and they were like, so you know more with Jay-Z? But I didn't, but I did. I was like, yo, this and this and this and this and this and this. And I think they were just like, literally, what do we have to lose? We fire this kid in a week and we get good jokes from it, And they're like, all right, you start for like no money.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right. And then I came in and I was like, I didn't know how to use any of the tools or the programs, like, and so there's this guy, Kevin, another one, and they had to kind of teach me it. But then, Chad, and later they all went to Glass Show, Vitamin Water, and that's where, you and a lot of other guys were designers there. And I kind of quit doing that right before Coca-Cola bought them to go work more full-time on my little skateboarding company. So my timing was impeccable.
Sounds a little bit like my interview with Chad, where I came in and I had a portfolio, but it was like one of those big leather-bound books.
Yeah,
and he was like, what kind of music you listen to?
Yeah.
And I was like, hip-hop and whatever. And he's like, you start Monday. And I was like, all right, let's go. And so, shout out to Chad. He's the fucking legend.
And that's the right way to do stuff. A lot of times it's like, it's just vibe checking, I think you and me are sitting here, 2 decades later with cool little design stories, but Chad just kind of knew, you can sometimes tell when you see or talk to enough people in some category or space, are they the vibe you're looking for? And you want a lot of times like gumption or hustle or energy, or determination over like skill and experience.
Vitamin Water, the phrase was attitude over skills.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot, especially with hiring. And I think Chad, at least, once every couple of years has been like, he really made my career. He really gave me a chance when looking back, like he had no reason to. It's not like I had an amazing portfolio of work. You showed up with a skateboard, and he gave us chances, and he was doing cool stuff, and he was doing amazing work, even, Raucous Records and like all the stuff like before, that era. But, that really was.
I never also knew like a creative director that was like digital,
I also didn't know shit when I got that job too. And I had someone, Medwin Pang, his brother Jefferson, and like, he was like, I just like held the bat behind my desk and he was like, where are my files? And I was like, I got to figure out how to fucking make these clipping pads quickly.
He was always a little pissed / scary.
Yeah. And so I remember meeting you and you were like, one of the things I remember was that you were always drawing. You were always like, kind of like had a little sketch, and you were always like kind of working on your work, but you were also like, I could see like thinking about other stuff outside the studio. And I was like, this is my one job. I'm going to go to the office. I'm going to go home. And you were like thinking about other things, freelance.
And Chad was really supportive of that. Like, sometimes you have a boss and it doesn't have to be your designer. It could be anything. And they'll be like, dude, like, no, or not here or whatever. But he always was like, oh, let me see that, and encouraging. And I've tried to pass that on, if it's Gin Lane or whatever, and I think in the early days of Gin Lane, I would get young kid being a boss, like defensive if someone wanted to quit or we had a disagreement or whatever. And I think as years have gone by, I've almost like encouraged everyone to quit at some point, meaning like, take what you've learned from here and what you don't like and go, because I've always tried to attract, I think, entrepreneurial people.
Sure.
But then you don't want to de-entrepreneur them.
Yeah, you don't hold them back. I think you're right too. Like he just, he let people be themselves. And I think that's the thing that I always think about too. It's just like, I don't want to stop people from being the most version of them. And it's like, whatever they do, it's hiring people too is like, you think like, how do you hire? It's like, you really truly got to look for a bunch of different skills, but really mostly it's people. And you're looking for good people that you think, can, have that ambition, have that drive, have that sort of thing. And
it's also who you work well with. And you always want to challenge yourself outside of your comfort zones. But if you know that you don't like work really well with a certain personality type, it's,
spend so much time with these people too.
Yeah.
So you were there, I was there, and you left to start a little company called Gin Lane.
Well, I did Lola, and then we kind of got into I dropped out of college also.
Yeah.
It's great. Another, to do skateboarding full time. All the money we were making from that, which was some, we're reinvesting into it. And so I kind of, had to support myself again. So I went back to what I was doing prior to Lola, which was like freestyle kind of, freelancer.
Sure.
And I was doing that and kind of, I got through those connections, a little bit better connections, but it actually got harder to get paid because a lot of the early work were people I knew. And so I kind of had the leverage where if they're like, oh, I'm a jewelry designer, I would love for you to do the website. I'm like $2,000, you know? And they're like, okay, let me come up with the first 1,000. I'm like, yeah, you should.
Yeah.
But then it, through that world, I'm doing stuff with, Universal Records or Pepsi DJ series or like all these independent music labels, that would like, that Cormega was signed to and stuff, and they were never paying me, I'm like, dude, I think whatever. Like I was so at that in my early 20s, like, I don't know, whatever. I was out of my mind. I remember going to a place, I don't know if I had a baseball bat or whatever, but I was just like, dude, pay me money. Like it was like net 120 days. And so I came up with Gin Lane because no one was paying me on time. And so I was like, and I started for the first year or two saying I worked for an agency.
Oh, not even like it's my agency.
No,
just like,
I didn't.
I need to get the money for them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good lesson for the kids out there.
Yeah. Call up these people, and sometimes it blew up in my face because you were almost too aggressive, of like, hey, you have to pay my client. I run an agency. He's one of our designers, and so I almost hid behind this facade to protect myself.
Yeah.
Because no one was paying, apartment 2C, Chinatown, Emmet, anywhere. And I was like, I can't do net 75.
Yeah.
Like I got to pay my rent now.
Yeah. I need this invoice expeditiously. So we don't have enough time to get into, the 10 years of Gin Lane, but how does it go from, a guy that can't get his invoices paid to creating some of the most iconic brands of the last 20 years? Harry's, Sweetgreen, Warby Parker, Hims, Recess, Sunday Goods, House, Smile Direct Club, like all these brands that basically you were a part of the origin of.
I think I've never been like a plan person. And I think when I've had plans, I've fucked it up.
Yeah.
And what I think worked of that 10 years was not having a plan and trying to just do the best job I could with what was in front of me and not being scared of opportunities presented. And so again, working with like jewelry designers and photographers, you know, a lot of them didn't have the budgets that I felt. I would say this is worth $5,000, and they're like, I have $1,750, and I'm like, I'll take it. But I would say in exchange, can you just find me, you know, $3,250 worth of business?
Yeah.
You're cooler than me. I don't know anyone in New York City except skate rats that like we're all sweaty and broke. Like you're on photo shoots or whatever. And they're like, okay. And some of them, nothing happened, but others, you know, like one guy, Tim Barber, you know, like I did some sites for him for pennies on the dollar, which I was really honored to do because he's just an awesome photographer at Tiny Vices, was doing stuff with Ryan McGinley, and Ryan McGinley kind of backed out of some campaign, and Tim got it for Stella McCartney. He spoke us up on set, you know, introduced us to Stella McCartney's creative team for whatever reason, liked us, quote unquote. And it was like me and like two 20-year-olds, you know?
Yeah.
And they chose us over like Sid Lee, RGA, like Chandelier Creative, whatever, you know? And then Adidas, it was for a collaboration with Adidas, and Adidas was so pissed because we couldn't even get in their system.
Yeah.
Like they're like, oh, have this accounting thing match up with this and we'll route it Germany, whatever. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I have a TD Bank checking account. That forwarded us into fashion. And then once we were doing fashion and we were just like, oh, what's the coolest thing we could do for this? What's the coolest thing we could do for this? And just pushing and pushing and pushing. Then weirdly, when the startup guys came around and it's Bonobos and it's Warby Parker and it's Everlane, they're like, okay, we'll go to New York as kind of this center for digital creative and websites and commerce because of fashion. Yeah. Who are the guys that are doing the coolest kind of work? And a lot of people said, oh, these weird kids in Chinatown are doing these really progressive websites that load fast. They work on these new things called phones.
iPhones, yeah.
You know, like we were so early on like, you know, thinking about breakpoints and like loading information fast that we were pretty, at the time, a progressive little shop, kind of like if some shop today was just ripping in terms of like generative AI that looked dope, you know, that could work for brands, or a lot of like, I think right now, like motion prototyping, rendering is like a really fun space that I've been really like looking at for like inspiration.
Sure.
So I think it was just kind of one foot in front of the other and trying to work with people that I thought like had, you know, momentum or juice or were part of a zeitgeist. And I think I'm kind of trying to almost go back to that now of just being curious and just ending up in weird areas.
Yeah.
And then just trying to like, I always just think any industry you're doing, you know, it could be, you know, soda, or it could be, you know, water, or it could be, you know, non-meat, you know, meat.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, okay, there's all these other people having a conversation in the space.
Sure.
They're presenting like this. How can I present something which is just human nature? It's like dancing or trying to impress a partner. What's your take?
Yeah. I mean, that's what branding is. It's all about just differentiation and meaningful communication. Emmett came in with the 10 design commandments. So I want to say this is the first time in front and center history where we had someone come in with their own philosophies and not just own topic, but like, I want to get this off of my chest. So I'm just going to take a hard pivot and we're just going to go there, because we could talk about, you know, sort of all these brands in the 2010s. We could talk pattern brands is what you've been doing for the last 10 years.
Five.
Yeah. Okay. So you do Gin Lane for 10. You basically, sorry, my research is shoddy at best. You know, you basically create a movement of new brands, a new aesthetic, right? Yeah. Which is simple and stripped down and loads fast. And these brands are now billion-dollar brands, all of them. You take equity in some and you're like, okay, I want to make my own. Pattern brands starts right around when I start Center. I remember I was at the party. You were starting this new company
around here.
Yeah, it was right around here. And you're like, I'm getting out of this agency game. And I was like, I'm getting into it. Yeah. I'd been a client for 10 years and it was time for me to go agency. And you're like, I'm going agency. I'm firing all my clients and I'm going to products. You've been doing that for 6 years. you've done incredibly. You've built a handful of really insane product companies, Equal Parts, Miracle, Letterfolk, like all these cool new companies, and now you're going back. What makes you want to go back?
I mean, I think, again, I'm like not a good plan person. And you just got to know who you are. I definitely am like a functional scatterbrain that I'm probably going to die without a plan, but I'm happy for a lot of what has happened in my life. And I think sometimes I just am listening to my gut, like do this,
people
try
need
this.
to hear this, because I think young people try to plan too much. I'm not a big planner guy. I think a lot of things I just do with good intentions and gut instinct, and it's gotten me pretty far. And it sounds like you've deployed a similar model of.
I turned 40 last year, and like, I don't feel 40. I don't look 40. I don't think I'm mature of what you'd expect of a 40-year-old. Like, I'm definitely stagnated in certain parts of the brain, but like, what I think I have learned, I'm like, I've lived a lot of days.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting more knowledgeably comfortable with who I am and who I'm not. And
it's the most beautiful thing.
And I think it's okay that I don't know what I'm doing. I wake up every day and I don't have a plan, and I have to like I literally am like Memento. Like, I don't know what day it is. I don't know what I have to do. I barely know where I am, and it takes me a while, like an hour or two. So I'm also not a great morning person.
Okay.
Like, it takes me a while to like figure out what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I have to do these things today with these people by this time, or whatever. And what is a strength to some extent is I'm endlessly focused on what's in front of me. So I have to try to just put stuff in front of me that makes me curious and makes me inspired. And I think with Pattern, we've bought a bunch of brands and we built this platform out, and I'm really proud of, what we've created. I think I just missed a little bit of the 0 to 1 conceptual creative tinkering. I've learned a lot about, globalization and offshoring and
supply
processes
chain.
And I got to build physical products and design physical products, which I still get to help and assist the team on. I'm also not, I want to be careful when I say this stuff, because it's like, I made a change because something's negative. There's nothing negative. And I think I also realized that in that conversation with you those years back, I think I was also maybe burnt out by a chapter.
Totally.
And I was looking for change. And I think I got that change, and then some with COVID.
Yeah.
And I also realized I'm not a really good manager. I'm not a really good operator. I'm not really good at a lot of these things that are required if you're running a business. I think I'm really great at leading people into challenges, solving problems, using creativity, seeing things that other people don't see, and mixing offline, art world aesthetic with progressive digital interfaces and experiences. That's all I want to do. And I think that was also a revelation, is that it's okay to be selfish. It's okay to also not be good at something. You don't have to fix everything you're not good at.
Well, you're not trying to prove yourself anymore. You've proven yourself. And I think I turned 40 in a couple months. And so I'm like, there's something that happens when you're kind of getting to that number. And I don't know, it's just like
21, 30, 40, 50. They're all big markers.
Yeah. And you kind of start to think like, I guess I am who I am now.
Totally.
And you're like, this is what makes me who I am. And I'm proud of that. And I don't want to change. And so I think, I don't know, I relate to that, hugely. And I also, I'm not sort of, I'm not thinking, okay, this is my 5-year plan. This is my 10-year plan. This is where I want Central to be at this moment, or this is what I want to do. And I think that helps me, because I just go with what feels right, and what feels right has been working. And I think it sounds all of this has worked for you, at least from the outside. Are you going to stay Pattern? Like, is Pattern still your baby, right? Like, you're still going to be running it.
More as like I always say, I'm like the old dead guy from Mad Men floating around the office, I'm like, but still in like a founder, executive capacity, helping Nick and Suze and Anum, who's our creative director, as much as I can. I'm just not as much in the 6 to 8 hours every single day of meetings that are with real responsibilities. I think there's folks that are a lot better at that, when the kid who is drawing on the side at, vitamin water, it hasn't changed. Right.
And this is what you love to do. And it's like,
I think I'm always going to be drawing on the side.
Yeah.
And so having a little bit my own practice, it doesn't put me in the way of other people, and it doesn't put me in a position where maybe I shouldn't be drawing.
I have also realized here, because this is my first time being an entrepreneur, and I sometimes think like, oh, I need to work. There's a lot of jobs being a studio founder, but being in the creative is the one that I love.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'm like, well, maybe I should just take a step back and, sort of get out of my design director's hair and just let my team do their thing. But it's like that part of it is what I love. It's the part that I enjoy doing every day. So I certainly understand why the sort of desire to just be in the making.
It's just the endless tension of like having responsibilities that allow you to do what you love. There's always going to be that tension. Like I would talk to this guy, Hugh Francis, who has Sanctuary, worked for me at Gin Lane back in the day. And it's always a struggle that he has of like, do I want to more be creative of how I engineer a studio?
Yeah.
Or do I want to be more creative of how I'm engineering?
Sure.
And sometimes it's kind of like, you can't totally have both as much as you want.
Yeah.
There have to be sometimes trade-offs with it. And I think for myself, at least for this stage, because also you don't have to make decisions that are forever. Like, I don't know about forward planning totally great, but I know about like chapters. And I think for this chapter, I kind of really want to go back to being a craftsman.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of missed. Like I'm in the wood shop smelling the wood, covered in wood chip dust.
Yeah. You're going back to the locker room. And you're like, oh, I like that smell.
Yeah.
The must.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, what if I put this jersey back on and
Yeah.
get back out there with the boys?
Yeah.
It does seem like you're kind of, you're going back to the roots. Why not go back to Gin Lane? Why create a third, sort of company?
Pattern Act, we hired Gin Lane. We sold Gin Lane into Pattern. So it was the equity that we had.
Okay.
But it also was the IP. So Gin Lane still is functioning and functional as a name and an entity and a domain and a social handle under the ownership of Pattern.
Okay.
And so I wanted to, pay homage to Gin Lane, but kind of create something anew. And Little Plains is the name of a road and a beach that intersects the road and the beach, Gin Lane. And it was the name of one of our conference rooms. So there's a lot of like, for the people of Gin Lane,
Sure.
they're like, oh, it makes total sense. Or the people that are from my hometown, that's all I care about too,
Yeah, and I love that you always bring in your mother's artwork. That's always a big part. So she did the sketches, like what, and she also worked on pattern branding.
I think again, it's like Nas and his dad, who's a musician, trumpet player, right? And then he gets on records, and he's on Life's a Bitch, right? And like other ones, like. I think that's kind of cool. And maybe when you're younger, you don't want to be under the shadow of your parent or parents or something, and you push away to go do your own stuff. But as you get comfortable later in life, like I now talk to my dad all the time. We live next to each other. Like if I can just be helpful with his landscaping business, we can talk as like two adults, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And with my mom, she's not a business woman.
Sure.
She's just a pure artist. And so I'm constantly hiring her for projects that I'm working on for Little Plains, which also I think sets the tone that I'm trying to be really artistic with branding projects that I'm doing. And so she's kind of like my spirit animal or North Star. And we work really well together.
I was going to say, how is she as a freelancer, as a vendor? Do you,
in particular?
Yeah. Challenging. My mom would love for me to hire her. She does calligraphy, and I thought, about
cool.
it. I was like, maybe she should do some lettering, and maybe she and I, we haven't.
If your mom's listening,
Joni, my mom is immediately after this interview. She'd be like, "Oh yeah, I heard you're interested in hiring me for a project."
That's cool that you have that background too.
Yeah, she's been painting because she retired, so maybe I should bring her in.
Hey, get her on in here.
Yeah, get her on some branding projects.
Shine with a Y, the company coming up.
Yeah. It's a beverage brand. Wake up every morning, rise and shine. That's it. It just writes itself. So before we get out of here, we got to talk about the 10 design commandments. So you're back into design. You've always been design.
Yeah.
So you got a rough outline here, and it's not rough. It's very thorough. But I want to let's go through it one by one.
Yeah.
First one, hierarchy of needs. Design is about making things work well for people. That's a quote from Don Norman. Design is the marriage from form and function for practical purposes. Know what your user needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was inspired by the 12 principles of animation by like the seven dwarves or whatever they're called from Disney, you know, that were like the original like animators with literally Walt Disney the person.
Yeah.
As well as the famous Notorious B.I.G. song.
Yes, of course. 10 Crack Commandments.
So I was just kind of thinking, and you know, when you guys reached out for this podcast, you've had some really great design thinkers and designers on it. I thought it could be something interesting that hopefully people listening to will like disagree with or agree with or engage with, because I think everyone has like their own thoughts or principles. So I was kind of just like the number 10 I've done for Pattern, like, you know, the 10-step guide to D2C, et cetera. And it still kind of gets views and shares on Medium. So I just thought like when you mimetically reduce things down, there's something that makes it easier to engage with, even if people don't agree.
Kevin noticed.
Yeah, you do love research. He said, you do love a group of list of 10.
Yeah, he loves a list of 10.
Enjoy daily life or Pattern, you know. But again, people love that. It got shared a ton, and I think it's just like a simplification from it, you know. So I put stuff in kind of an order of operations to think about. That I was like, what do I go through as a process? Because you know, like the difference between like a Michael Jordan and a Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr can be like a great coach because he wasn't as naturally like talented or gifted as Michael Jordan. Yeah. And, you know, he had to work really hard and can better empathize and articulate it. Sure. Where a Michael Jordan is just like works super hard, but is just so insanely talented that these things come to him that are so in the moment that they're hard to tell or to empathize with. Yeah. And sometimes I like to try to think I'm like Michael Jordan in the moment of flow, but I also, I want to talk like Steve Kerr.
Yeah. I think about coaching all the time. Like I watch so many documentaries, Hard Knocks, like literally all of my main inspiration for being a leader and a boss comes from coaches.
Yeah. And a lot of coaches, they were players. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like,
Andy Reid is the one who said, like, you know, be yourself. Like, there's, you know,
and
the standard is the standard.
Like, he's like, beat the Bengals too, you know?
Yeah. Run on third down. No, it's like, no, I think coaching, like designers are all coaches, right? Like we're all coaching other people. We're helping people. We make things, but of course, like we're always, you know, there's as much as about communication and about telling people why they should care about things. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess in your design commandments, like the first one, it's like, what does someone need and what do we need to convey?
Yeah, like I think that's step one.
Yeah, that's step one.
Right, that's step one. You can't, you shouldn't, I don't think you should start designing or communicating something if you don't understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What do they need?
And in my opinion, there's no good or bad design. There's just effective and ineffective design.
Design is an application art. So it's art that has an application.
Okay.
It means it has to do something.
Yes.
Right? Art doesn't have to do anything. Correct. It can make you feel something if you want to.
Yes.
But design has a functional service.
I like this. This is fun.
Right?
Now we're just rap battling with design codes. No, because it's for people to understand things. Mm-hmm. My centerism is designs for people, not products, right? Because people come here and they're like, I want to learn about, tell me, you know, I want people to know about how great my ice cream is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's a lot of great ice creams out there. But why is your ice cream different?
Yeah.
And why? What
there
role
you go.
What role does ice cream
You're
play?
following rule number one.
What role does ice cream play in people's lives?
Uh-huh.
You know? Why do you eat ice cream?
Ice cream, you scream. We all scream for ice cream.
Yeah, it's about celebration. It's about family.
Yeah, there you go.
It's about winning a football game. Mm-hmm. You know? That's why you get ice cream.
If Joe gets to the Lombardi, he's breaking out the ice cream.
Oh yeah, of course,
yes, sir.
You notice Kevin is trying to look more and more like Joe Burrow. I don't know if you
I saw it.
Yeah. No, that's his style icon. He brings a picture of him to the barber.
Joe's like Hobbs from Calvin and Hobbes times Joe Burrow.
Yeah, he's the coolest guy. I mean, I understand why. I mean, I'm a Giants fan, so my quarterback situation ain't better than yours. Number 2, contrast and focus. Mm-hmm. So in nature, these are your words. So do you want to read these or do you want me to read them? Yeah.
I wrote just like notes to self. I mean, this is, I just thought we'd have some fun with it being unpolished, but like, I was like, yo, in nature, you have zebras and you have chameleons.
That one rocks. That was my favorite.
In design, sometimes you want high contrast, like for legibility, for safety, you know, and then sometimes you want softness or a lack of contrast as an example would be interiors or fabrics. You can have high contrast of ones, but I'm just thinking of like a Skims house, you know?
Yeah.
And contrast tunes up or down where we focus. So it's incredibly important to understand that, as I put the second rule, and contrast creates focus.
Bars, you know? Yeah. So I actually went through these and I wrote my own thoughts underneath them. So I'm going to just read my thoughts already.
Spit. Yeah. We're like in the basement. Like he's Big Tigger.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Ready for this? Everything is relative.
Okay.
Something only looks big next to something small. That's why you can't tell how tall someone is on Zoom.
Yeah, that's true.
Something bold only looks bold next to something thin. Things need balance and context to be understood. That's
contrast
rule number
and focus.
2. Contrast
I
and
think
focus.
we could put would you say the last word context?
Context. Yeah. This is
I think
this is design, baby.
The contrast of context helps you to see what to focus on or how to focus on it.
Bars. Number 3, color theory.
I put like each primary color has a mammalian root in what it conveys. You know, for example, blue and green can exude life and safety. A lot of, people say that like we're from the water and it's aquamarine, and there's the plenishment of if you're out in the savannas and you see something blue, it can be an oasis. Or if it's green, it's health, right? And red can be danger, but it also, if you know anything about like fast food, reds and oranges they trigger you being wanting to eat. They make stuff kind of like delicious and umami in your mouth. White can allow like projection and clarity, safety and peacefulness, but it can also be like, can make you go like crazy, and black, absorption, depth, infinitude, but wonder, mystery. And purple's a fun one, like royal and wealthy, but can be mysterious, spiritual, and calm. So there are practical applications. Like a fun fact is like orange has the highest contrast on the primary pinwheel with blue.
I didn't know this until I read your commandments.
That's why they use orange for water safety devices. So, right, there's a motive things that color can do immediately, but there's also very practical applications.
Sure.
So, I put like color theory has both practical and emotional design implications.
I had nothing to say to this one. I just said colors matter. So no, you're right. And I do think color theory is something, especially when it comes to branding, and we talk about it a lot. It's like something will look so different if you just change the background from white to black.
Well, I mean, like, that you're kind of like famous soda cans and stuff. There are some associatives with it that are what the ingredients are.
Yeah.
But part of the brilliance is them all lined up together with one color palette kind of hue running across it.
Yep. It's funny. We actually were super inspired by painters, by sort of looking at sort of how colors blend and how we didn't necessarily want to depict the actual fruits. We wanted just the feeling and the flavors. So thank you. Chaos versus order is number 4.
Yeah. Like this is one where like a lot of people are like, God doesn't paint in straight lines. And like, there's so much like symmetry and harmony in nature, and we associate as humans, this person's beautiful. Usually there's a higher degree of like symmetry to their face or proportionality to their body. And in one sense, in a classical sense, you could be like artists that are learning, perspective, or they're trying to design stuff which is harmonious and sound and thus timeless. There's also a school of thought, which I put, that's like punk and anti, where you want to break that on purpose. Like you want to have anti-harmony, and whether it's implicitly or explicitly, like Bruce Lee style, like you got to know the rules to break them, right? So I think it's good as a designer to understand that nature provides a lot of a blueprint for what is harmonious and symmetrical that we're attracted to. If you want to go down that route, rules of thirds, have negative space here, this matches up and this is balanced, and sometimes you want to fuck with it. If you want to create something that's uncomfortable or a tension, and both of those are really valuable to understand.
I'm sure you've read the book Hitmakers. I think about that a lot, about how things need to be familiar and surprising. And so like all the great music, all the great movies that has sort of skyrocketed were breaking some sort of rule, but they were also following other rules in an effort for people to get it. And I think about that a lot when we do work where it's like, people need the context that it is a soda. So, but it's in a can, so it's you know what I mean? So you get that. But then you can kind of break it by taking all the soda sort of rules off of it, or other products that are sort of like, Liquid Death breaks the rule of it, sort of looking like beer, or things like when you break the rules, things stand out. And so people don't pay attention to things that don't break some sort of familiarity that people have, but also things that are too chaotic.
Yep.
People don't have context for. So they can't place
Too much chaos can be like David Lynch on a bad day.
Yeah. You don't people don't they just don't.
So it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah, they don't get it, or they can't put
if you think of everything the amount of words we're talking per minute, is around how much someone can intake. Even just right now in the podcast, we're not speaking too crazy slow, and we're not speaking psychotically too fast. It's the same with order and harmony. Sure. You're trying to give people an absorption rate of information that they can take in. So even if it is then something unfamiliar or breaking the rules, it's probably still being delivered. It's not like, this movie was so crazy, it was 18 hours long.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's not happening.
I couldn't see that movie. I have a hard time with 2-3 hour movies, Kevin. My attention span is really fucked. And I think that's because of phone and reality television. Number 5 is choreography. I thought this one was super interesting.
Yeah, I talk a lot in doing websites and applications about content choreography. So you load up a website or an app, you as the people working on it, you can choose timing, right? Yeah. So I always get my feathers ruffled when people a site loads in, it's like a fax machine, or it's and I'm like, yo, make it graceful. Yeah. And then what do you want the logo to come in first? How many seconds or milliseconds do you want to load in? Then upon scroll, this piece of text comes in, this image comes in, this goes away. Because again, to short attention span, to chaos versus harmony, you gotta really be anticipatory about focus and attention. And if you have choreography, it's no different than a choreographer working on a play with dancers. Oh, the eye is gonna go here for, whatever, Swan Lake, and then this person comes in from stage left.
Yeah.
Voila, right? And so I think it's not just content choreography for digital, but if you're laying something out for spatial design, or for a restaurant or interior design, or I'm coming into, the office, and it's like, well, this is the natural flow where you go right. Just like grocery stores, people go right. That you go around and then you exit to the left. So understanding choreography is another one of these things which people mistake that it's subjective.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, my sort of thoughts here was and I hate the term storytelling, but it is. It's very much how people understand. Design's about communication.
We could call this 10 steps of storytelling.
Yeah, it's the best way to tell someone about something is to tell them a story. Be like, oh, this is where it starts, this is where it goes, and this is how it ends. And the simpler that story, the better it is for people to understand. And I always say the world should be more like a children's book. No, I'm kidding. That's your quote.
I do like children's books.
I thought that was super interesting. You made a piece of content about children's books, and your mom worked on them. Do you want to just hit on that for a second? Or
I think it's the same principles. I was saying, I forget what the quote was, but it was saying, it was like I was doing some research on children's books, and it was some quote on one of them, like a famous one. It was saying how deceptively simple it was, and I was like, damn, that's the phrase. That's it. That's good design. That's good children's books. There's life lessons that are being imparted on impressionable little humans that also probably need an adult to focus and engage and tell them to it. So it's two people as an audience. One is giving to the other. One is at a high absorption rate. The other one's at maybe a lower latent absorption rate. But there's a lot of complex narratives and story plots that need to go into how much information someone can take in. And there's usually visuals to assist the absorption. Yeah. So there's a lot of things at play that are in The Hungry Caterpillar or Goodnight Moon that everyone knows, but you just take for granted, just like seeing art and being like, oh, my kid could do that, but not every kid could have the tension and understanding of Jackson Pollock's painting at the time and what it meant and the resonance of it and the tension of it. That's another chaos and harmony 101. So I think children's books are really great for reductionary understanding of beats of information.
And people need to make things simple. Or like, people are dumb.
Keep it simple, stupid.
That's right.
KISS.
Yes, people are dumb, and a lot of people aren't thinking. They're also just on thinking about lots of things going on in the world. There's a lot. So it's like if you expect them to sort of sit there and be like, oh, we need to digest all this information and try to get to the bottom of it. It's like
being selfless. It's like being self-absorbed is thinking that everything is about you.
Yes.
Someone is mean to you on the street or driving, and you're like, why would they besmirch my reputation like that? But you don't know, maybe they just got divorced or got fired or whatever, they're self-absorbed in their lives. And so I think being selfless is not assuming or presupposing, and it's saying, I'm going to slow down and make this simple for you.
Yes.
Because you probably have a lot going on.
Yeah. And you don't care about this thing. So I need to make you care about it.
Yeah.
So if I make it too complex, we don't stand a chance.
Yeah. People care when it's simple. That's that's luxury, man. That's what like a luxury experience is. It's like,
how do I make it better for you?
Yeah.
Like, how do I make life better? Speaking of experience, immersion, tactility.
Yeah. I think for this one, I was saying like, not everything with design. I do a lot that's like digital, but I like skeuomorphic design, neumorphic. You're like recreating tactility for how one interfaces with what's behind the screen.
Yeah.
And that comes from principles of actual tactility and feeling. And so you can look at the cans, and say, I want the light to be absorbed. I want it to be more matte versus luster versus gloss. I want to use a metal. I want to use a wood. I want to use this type of plastic coating. Right? There's so much thought that goes into the materiality to provide like interplay with light and fingers. And even if you're not one-to-one using materials which are going to be physically touched, those fundamentals carry over even if they're behind a screen.
Yeah, we're working on a digital product, and we don't do a ton of that. And we're actually running into this right now. Where it's like we want to make it feel valuable. And we want to make it feel not flat and give it a dimension. And because it's, it lives on a screen, so it's hard to make it feel as valuable as something that lives in your hand.
Yeah.
And so what can you do?
Get skeuomorphic.
Yeah, get skeuomorphic.
Make that background feel like a Tiffany's box.
Exactly. Make that calculator look like a calculator, And I think that's kind of where the iPhone started.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything went flat.
Yep.
And now maybe we should go back to making things feel.
Yeah, I'm on skeuomorphic train right now.
Yeah. So you would probably do a great job with this project, which I can't talk about. Moving on. But no, it's a super interesting thing, especially when it comes to digital products that you're replacing something that was physical with your phone that, like, I don't know if I need this thing anymore.
Yeah.
So if it's on my phone, then it's now just a flat thing on my phone.
Yeah.
But how can it be more than just a flat thing on my phone?
And does it have value or feel the same value as a Platinum Amex? You feel the heft and the weight.
Perfect example.
Yeah,
that feels valuable.
The word heft.
Yeah. You throw it down on a table and it fucking clings and it's like it shines and you look like a fucking like it's got real value.
Yeah.
This is another really interesting one. Number 7, gender and personification. So this is a really kind of like I think very topical design commandment.
Yeah, I was thinking like in the traditional sense of like masculine, feminine properties, and examples I wrote were like, Jafar from Aladdin is, sketched out as an upside down triangle, which is a universal like animator's body type for a villain. And, and so if you think of a lot of like bad characters or creatures, they're more top heavy in an angular sense. Then, it's like the Despicable Me is almost like a streamlined version of that.
Yeah.
Versus like a Coca-Cola bottle, has this femininity to it because it's curvaceous. And I said furniture has historically had a cool interplay of masculine and feminine design properties. There's quote unquote masculine features where it's sturdy, it's durable, there's, hardness to it. Right. But then there's femininity to it in that it has to be inviting and holding of a body, and so even these chairs we're sitting on, they have some more masculine properties and they have some really beautiful feminine kind of curves.
And they hurt our backs. They look cool, but they're terrible.
Not very ergonomic.
Yeah.
And then the other word, which I always love and always struggle to pronounce, is anthropomorphic.
Okay.
Which is like,
for sure.
Again, like Pixar style. I always say like, WALL-E, and they'd bring to life personalities of 2 trash cans.
Yeah.
Or little trash can kind of robot. And then Eva, like everything everywhere all at once, when there's like two rocks just kind of talking to each other.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden you start to develop an understanding of the personalities of these rocks.
Yeah.
So I think when people are coming to you and they're saying, yo, I want this product to be whatever.
Yeah.
Number one, you got to understand the needs. And then as you progress forward with these principles, you can start to anthropomorphic think about the personality or the consciousness of this inanimate object or an experience, which is not even physical. And then you can think about the gendered kind of moments with that.
Yeah, at Coke, I remember when I worked on any structural design projects, they always wanted soft angles. They wanted everything to sort of be soft and friendly. So especially when you're in a retail store, if something has a sharp angle on the sort of like display, you might not want to get that close to it. But if it's sort of soft and angular, and you have no problem like walking closer up to it, which is super interesting.
And these are just like, they boil down again to like fundamental principles that are hard coded into being a human, into being beyond a human. It's like a mammal, an animal. That's where I think it's a lot of fun to think about how design melts away from a surface place to just communication.
So I'm a mentor at the Masters in Branding program at SVA, and my mentee, I've been doing this for a long time, and he was here today working on his thesis. I don't know how much of this I probably can talk about, but the thesis this year is about gender design. And it's super interesting because his like a brand that he was assigned makes toys. And so these toys tell stories about men and women and sort of to kids. And so there's a lot of like...
Yeah, that's even a different type of... And I don't mean this in like a pronouns capacity. I mean it in like, I don't know, like a Greco-Roman whatever.
Nature.
Nature.
Yeah. And I just think it's a really interesting topic when it comes to design, because oftentimes people are using, this looks too masculine, this still looks too feminine. Those things are changing, and people are not, sort of necessarily.
I think of it like Freudian or Jungian or something, and it's like closing your eyes and touching something, and does it push back? Does it absorb in?
So, and your simple takeaways, I probably should have been reading here, though this one is personalities instill purpose and energy.
Yeah. And I think it kind of, really it's, whether it's gendering or providing anthropomorphic of an animal having a human property, at the end of the day, they're personalities. And I think they can provide purpose and energy.
I want to see Inside Out too. I haven't seen
it.
That's what
I love the Inside Out one.
Yeah, I got to see it. 8. We're rounding the corner here. Implicit versus explicit. This is another one that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like I said, how far do you want to lean into revealing your hand?
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes I say like really good design is where it's invisible and it's taken for granted.
Sure.
But other times you may want design to be front and center.
Sure.
Where it has an explicit purpose for attracting and demanding attention. And I think, again, just like to break harmony, you need to understand harmony. It's like, if you want to be explicit, you need to know how to be implicit. And if you want to be implicit, you also you have to know how to be explicit. And I think subtlety versus boldness, choose your reveal.
Yeah. No, and I think for me, I like things that are bold versus things that are subtle. So I'm just what I gravitate towards, because I think those things are more exciting. But I think sometimes mystery goes a long way in making something more interesting. I think about Kin Euphorics a lot with that brand. Yeah, because like when it launched, and still to this day, like people don't fully get it. They're like, what the hell is a euphoric? What's an adaptogen? The brand copy is like a bit vague in some ways. I think that only makes it more mysterious. Like, and I think not revealing the full like cards.
It's like pulling in versus projecting out.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to project out.
Yeah.
Yo, I've arrived. Hear me. Versus other times you want to kind of show up and be like,
Yeah. I'm always like, I'm here. Listen to me now. But I respect the sort of the Emmett Shine way.
Mysterious and alluring.
Just roll in and just be. Where do I put my stuff? Number 9, man versus machine.
Yeah, like I was saying, doing artwork with my mom and stuff, and like for CPG or packaging and stuff, physical. That's where I'm trying to lean into touched by a human. Yeah. Because I think there's more dots per inch. You don't have to vectorize everything, and I do think it can play well where people are like, oh, this food brand that's like touched by hand, that makes me think of it's more crafty and organic and thoughtful. But there's other times where you may not want to get that across because there has to be a feeling of precision. And I think sometimes we don't trust if it's safety, security, high velocity, speeds, complexity. Yeah. Oh, don't worry, there's a bunch of humans that are taking care of this. And you're like, no, I actually want to feel that there is machine. Yeah. There is automation. There is an algorithm. And so that's why like you may not have, a watercolor kind of cute, lovely day restaurant scene if it's like an AI security data intelligence startup, right? It wouldn't make you instill total trust.
But maybe it should.
I think like for Pattern, and it was going to be, when we raised capital and everything, I really wanted the logo to be touched by hand. Yeah. Because I wanted that to be a through line. Yeah. That would bring it back to a place of humanity, that it's products that are going into people's homes.
I think all your companies have this principle, I would say.
Yeah, I like a touched by hand component.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because so much of your work is digital products. Yep. So it makes perfect sense that on the outside,
it's tension.
Yeah, and that is principle number 2, right?
Yeah.
No, but it's true. It's like when things are too digital tech, people have a hard time connecting with it too. And I think your mom's painting and sort of just like the humanity that sort of is on, sort of the surface of all of your companies is inviting. Yeah. It's warm.
And the last 2 lines of it was, this can apply for structural design too. Sometimes like a bank, has pillars and design elements that, make it feel really safe and sturdy. Yeah. And other times a building has charm to it and it's a cute bed and breakfast that, connotes a different feeling. And the takeaway was design can build connections or feel automatic. And the or feel automatic could seem to not be as powerful or something maybe, but sometimes you want something to feel automatic, like an airplane. Sure. You just want it not to feel like, oh, this flight's going to be different than the last flight,
how's it flying today?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think in my head, I was just like, what if a bank was like a bed and breakfast? Like, what if it had, those kind of design motifs?
I think it would be really cute, but then they're like, oh my God, we lost your savings account. It's like in the laundry. Whoops.
Yeah. It's lost in that couch over there. The
guest has it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. But I do think fucking with those codes, like I often think about
totally.
Why does every men's barbershop look the same?
I know.
Like I just have a question. Like I'm just asking those things. It's like
they do look crazy.
Yeah. It's like, why do we all have to get a whiskey or a beer with our haircuts?
I know.
And like be in this sort of like
that's just what men do.
I remember I was going to some of those and I'm like, yeah, actually I will have like and then after a while I was like, come on, man. It's like 1 on a Tuesday.
Exactly. I want my haircut. I'm not trying to be in Peaky Blinders. It's like we don't need this aesthetic. We don't need this vibe. So I think about that a lot where I'm like, why does all of this look this way? How can we break that down? But I do think you're right. Like the reason why is, I don't know, it's a men's grooming, or I don't know what it says about men that they want to sort of you want this.
Got to get the men feeling comfortable before you make them look good.
That's right. We need a little whiskey. The last one I think is probably the most important here, and it's time and space. And
two shout outs. I want to shout out a woman, Megan Dolce, who has something called Get Ripe, and does like coaching and stuff. And I sent this list to her. I was like, oh, I'm going on front and center and I want to try to get it right. And I was struggling with the takeaways. So she helped me with some of the takeaways. So thanks to her. And then time and space, again, back to Tim Barber, who I work with. He always loved this phrase. He probably has bought 10 different variations of this for URLs. But he's always been really interested with the notion of time and space. And what I kind of wrote, is we said earlier, design is an application art and it has like a function. But I also think the function, if you can get to stage 10, you can really tap into some stuff, which is pretty cool. And, I put, as designers, we are creating new experiences, journey, moments, and worlds. Mm-hmm. Where do you want your user to go and to be? In the past, in the present, in the future, first person immersed and pulled in, or third person omnipresent observing? There is an invisible NUE of dimensionality to design that is advanced but important. And the takeaway is design is a gateway to deeper exploration. So if you 10 design commandments start and understanding the need and you get to 10, that's like, you know, when they make you hold the buckets in the Kung Fu film to get to the top of like the temple and then you deserve it.
Yeah. Well, I guess we deserve it. I think we should, you know, I guess they should live online or something, because I do think they're so smart and they're so interesting. And, you know, I just am so thankful that you came in with all this material. And now I know that there was someone else even working on it, you know, giving some ideas and some advice. You know, my thought about this one, which is, you know, sort of what I say a lot, is like brands are a reflection of culture and culture is a reflection of brands. So it's like everything we do, kind of going back to the idea of context, is like some things sometimes are too early or too late because people don't have that reference for it. They don't understand it. And I think for your work, I feel like, kind of doing, you know, sort of my research here, it's like you seem to always be ahead of where people are going a little bit. And I think the best design helps people understand the future, but like brings it to today and says, here, let me make it like a children's book, and like,
what's
let me break it down.
What's that designer, Raymond something from like 1950s? He like, oh man, he had all these cool phrases and stuff, but he was a master at designing the future that was accessible. It's like he has like this really cool acronym. Gosh darn it.
Raymond Lowery?
Raymond Lowery.
Yes.
Yeah. Type in Raymond Lowery like acronym or something.
I have some,
you know,
I have access to the internet here.
Let's see. But there's like a really great acronym about like the adjacent next, essentially. I know the adjacent next. I think that's like Steven Johnson, the writer, phrased that. But Raymond Lowery was all about how do you, and you know, 1950s kind of like, I was working on a design project recently, and the kid was like, yo, Emmet, I'm trying to understand your futuristic take on this. Do you want it to be like futuristic now? Or are you talking about like 1950s futuristic? And I was like, 1950s futuristic. Because that was this time where like, it seemed like we were going to do everything and anything, you know, and you had to start making people comfortable, which is kind of going to happen, I think, right now a little bit with like real AI stuff. Is like things are going to change in the years to come, and we're going to have to get comfortable and also make each other comfortable with some new models and paradigms and ways of experiencing and navigating reality.
Yeah, I mean, the best quote I found was, "Design is too important to be left to designers." That's a Raymond Lowery bar. But no, I mean, I think you're right. We're entering into a very interesting moment for design. But I think the principles stay the same. You know what I mean? I think that we'll have new tools. We'll have a lot of things that, you know, we will need to better understand, because I think it's moving fast. And I think at the end of the day, Brian Collins, another mentor of mine, has a great quote that I always say, which is, design's not what we make, but what we make possible for others. And I think that idea that we're still just, trying to create this experience or this journey, and to pull people in and to help them explore or make and give them the tools. I think that's ultimately what we're doing. And so thank you for coming in here, man, and dropping all these bombs. I mean, to be honest, this is by far the most informative and educational piece of
very enlightening
content that
trying to bring the heat. You know?
I know. Most people, they just come and they're just like, what do you want me to do? And I'm just like, sit there and just talk to us. Emmett, thank you so much for doing this. You're an absolute legend. And honestly, I want people, we didn't even touch on any of the amazing things, obviously, that Emmett has done. So go research, go check out his work, because Emmett is a hero of mine and just a great guy, and just showing that, you know what, there's a way to do all this, and, you know, just be a stand-up dude and just try to help other people and make cool shit and just follow your gut.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Kevin. And to everyone that is designing and listening, thank you. And hit us back, engage with the podcast and online if you like, agree, or disagree with these commandments.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Yep.
We'll see you next time. Peace.